Shin the Vina se was of Valor saw Hannah V. And ever was it sweet for wish. Mark say first by the ship and yet such Zerima. Her owners lushed the Allah and Zerach, the Labrador se will be. Naira. Hail my fsit that off was also we sure remember the we matched the beam to her for off me not the odds. And it his shape so the line at your off that better who nish. Tonight don't invite the who need a raw issue. Said I need seal ois nipple. Sarge dirk not old Mr. Nail fresh Sarge dash. Her husnish nested no wonder were no gummer from your her like it's nay her sla, her dodge bets it, Arima. But they'll out in it sorg no baskin over vet. He passed will no vet. Her in the little fiend blur Williamson. Nor crab and they'll foss the elf gazim. Look at her fell. See our but this is the with that name ask if of this over it. There's no middle so side. Thought was in our shirt nothing to no she. Sir oh girl for the certainty then. Sir Alf from the stealth of the air cat so not mark out. En als je was nog weet waaruit je ook naar gedacht in de zee en de strijd mag niet aan. En we in het feit uit wel als waar ik hem weet. Amira stood in the corner of the courtyard, trying to make herself small in the crowd. She wasn't hidden, but no one noticed her. Everyone's eyes were on the silk-covered cars and the proud children of Kunal, her stepfather. She pressed her hands together in front of her, the soft Ankara fabric of her dress brushing against her skin. She had chosen that dress carefully. It wasn't flashy, but it carried her mother's touch. The colors were warm, earthy brown with gold patterns, and she hoped they would at least make her look like she belonged. But deep inside she knew the truth. Kunal never treated her as his own. His words were always sharp when they reached her. His eyes always cold when they landed on her. For years she had learned how to live with that silence, that invisible wall between them. Still, a small part of her heart couldn't stop wishing, just a little, that maybe today would be different. Maybe today he would call her forward, smile at her, or even say her name with kindness. As the laughter of the other children filled the air, Amira forced herself to smile faintly, though her chest felt heavy. She watched Kunal's 3 biological children standing proudly near the cars, whispering excitedly among themselves. Their clothes shone with wealth, polished shoes, bright dresses, designer watches. They looked like they were waiting for their crowns. And then there was her, the outsider, the girl holding her breath in the shadows. She thought of her mother for a moment, the only person who ever told her she was enough, who reminded her that dignity was stronger than diamonds. That memory gave her the strength to stand still, even though every whisper, every laugh, every glance made her feel more invisible. Amira kept her chin lifted slightly, as if she was telling herself, "You will not cry here. You will not bow your head." She stood silent, but inside her heart, storms of longing and hurt clashed, waiting for the moment when all truths would be revealed. Kunal walked into the center of the courtyard like a king about to crown his heirs. His voice was loud, his smile wide, and every step carried pride. The crowd clapped as he stretched out his hands toward the silk-covered cars. "Today," he said proudly, "my children will receive gifts that show how much I love and value them." Excited whispers spread like fire. The 3 children stepped forward, their faces glowing with joy, already certain that this day belonged to them. Kunal pulled away the first silk cloth, and a brand new black SUV sparkled under the afternoon sun. Gasps of admiration filled the air, followed by cheers and applause. The eldest son, Kalechi, ran to the car, his laughter echoing as cameras flashed. Guests pulled out their phones, capturing the moment, praising Kunal for being such a generous father. Then came the second reveal. A sleek red convertible stood gleaming like fire. His second child, Adaora, covered her mouth with both hands, tears of joy shining in her eyes. She rushed to hug her father, her golden dress flowing as people clapped even louder. "A father's love is priceless," someone in the crowd shouted, and Kunal lifted his chin proudly. Finally he unveiled the third car, a silver luxury sedan. His youngest, Ifani, almost jumped out of his shoes, running around the car in circles shouting, "This is mine! This is mine!" The crowd laughed warmly, their voices rising in celebration. More flashes, more applause, more admiration. But behind all this joy, one figure stood still. Amira. She watched silently as the 3 children posed beside their shining cars, their arms wrapped around their father, their laughter filling the courtyard. She didn't clap. She didn't move. She only pressed her hands tighter together, feeling her heart sink deeper with each cheer. She told herself to be strong, but inside she felt smaller and smaller, as if the gifts were not only cars, but also reminders that she did not belong, not in Kunnal's heart. When the cheers for the last car finally faded, Kunnal turned slowly, his eyes landing on Amira for the first time that evening. She froze where she stood, her heart thumping hard in her chest. For one small moment she thought maybe, just maybe he had something for her too. She tried to believe he wouldn't completely forget her, not in front of so many people. Kunnal gave a half smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. With a careless flick of his hand, he pulled a tiny package from his pocket and tossed it toward her. It landed in her palms awkwardly, almost slipping through her fingers. The crowd turned their eyes to her as she unwrapped it slowly, her breath shaking. Inside, folded neatly, was nothing but a pair of socks. Plain. Ordinary. Cheap. "This is enough for you," Kunnal said loudly, his tone sharp, almost mocking. Laughter broke out instantly. Some guests tried to hide their chuckles behind their hands, others let it spill out openly. Even his children smirked, whispering to one another as they clutched their car keys tightly. Amira's chest tightened as the sound of laughter wrapped around her like chains. She stared at the socks resting in her hands, her throat burning with unspoken words. For a second she wanted to cry, to scream, to ask why. But instead, she lifted her chin and forced her face into calmness. If they wanted her broken, she would not give them that satisfaction. Her fingers trembled as she folded the socks back into the wrapping paper. The humiliation burned deep inside her, but she held onto her dignity like it was the only thing she had left. Around her, the laughter continued, people shaking their heads as though she was a joke, as though her worth could be measured by a pair of socks. In that moment, Amira felt invisible, but she also felt something stir inside her. Something quiet, something strong. She would carry this shame in silence, but one day, she knew life itself would answer for her. And when that day came, every log. Amira stood frozen in the middle of the courtyard, the cheap pair of socks still resting in her trembling hands. Her heart sank so deeply it felt like it would never rise again, yet not a single tear escaped her eyes. She swallowed hard, her throat tight, but she refused to break down in front of them. She knew that was what some of them wanted, to see her cry, to see her beg, to see her humiliated. Instead, she lifted her chin slowly, forcing herself to stand straighter than before. The laughter around her began to fade into whispers. People leaned toward one another, murmuring under their breath. "Did he really just give her socks?" one woman whispered. "Imagine the shame," another man muttered. Some guests shook their heads, pretending to pity her, while others smirked, enjoying the drama as if it were a play. Each word cut Amira deeply, but she wore her silence like armor. Inside her chest, pain screamed to be released. Every heartbeat carried the weight of rejection. Every breath reminded her she didn't belong here. But she remembered her mother's words, spoken years ago when she was just a child. "Amira, never let anyone see you bend. Even when they try to crush you, hold your head high. Dignity is your crown." Those words were her anchor now. So she stayed still, gripping the socks tightly until her knuckles turned white. She focused on her breathing, steady and controlled, though inside she was crumbling. She wanted to disappear, to run far away where no one could laugh at her. Yet she stood her ground. The silk-covered cars gleamed under the sun, but in that moment, they looked less like gifts and more like weapons of comparison, each one reminding her of what she didn't have. Still, she refused to let the shame swallow her whole. She reminded herself quietly, "This moment will not define me. I will not let them win." Her silence spoke louder than any words could. While everyone expected to see a broken girl, what they saw instead was a young woman rap. Just as the last bits of laughter were dying out, the heavy wooden gates of the courtyard opened slowly. All eyes turned as a man stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, with a briefcase in his hand and glasses resting firmly on his face. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, serious, important, that immediately shifted the mood in the courtyard. Conversations stopped. Whispers froze. Even Kunnal's proud smile faltered slightly. The man cleared his throat gently and spoke with a steady, commanding voice. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Mr. Adewale. I am the legal representative of the late Chief Obinna." His words cut through the air like a blade, and silence spread across the compound. No one expected this interruption. The joyful atmosphere suddenly felt heavy, almost tense, as though a storm had entered the celebration. Guests exchanged confused glances. Some leaned closer to one another, asking quietly, "Why is the lawyer here today?" Kunnel's children clutched their new car keys a little tighter, frowns replacing their earlier smiles. Even Kunnel himself straightened his shoulders, trying to regain his confidence, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Amira, standing with the sock still pressed to her chest, blinked in surprise. For the first time that day, someone had entered who wasn't laughing at her, who wasn't mocking her. She didn't know why the lawyer was here, but his presence felt like a sudden pause in her nightmare. Mr. Adiwale adjusted his glasses and lifted the briefcase slightly. "I have come on an urgent matter regarding the final will and testament of Chief Obinna," he continued firmly. The name carried weight in the air, a name tied to wealth, power, and legacy. Gasps escaped from some of the relatives in the crowd. The courtyard that had been filled with cheers just moments ago now held its breath. The lawyer's presence was Mr. Adiwale stepped further into the courtyard, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence that had swallowed the celebration. In his hand he held a folder thick, worn at the edges, but carried with the kind of care that told everyone it was important. He rested it against his chest for a moment before speaking again. His voice calm yet powerful. "I have come to read the final will and testament of Chief Obinna, the late father of this household." The words hit the air like thunder. Gasps spread through the crowd. Guests turned to one another, whispering, their earlier smiles now replaced with confusion. No one had expected this. They came for a celebration of gifts, not for the reading of a will. Even Kunnel's children stopped admiring their cars, their faces stiffening as the weight of the announcement sank in. Kunnel tried to laugh lightly, though his voice shook. "Mr. Adiwale, surely this could have waited? Today is a happy occasion." But the lawyer only adjusted his glasses and shook his head slowly. Chief Obinna was clear in his instructions. His will must be read in front of the family, in this very home and without delay. The atmosphere shifted completely. The cars, once shining like trophies, now seemed irrelevant. Eyes moved from the vehicles to the folder in the lawyer's hand. That folder carried power, answers, and truths that no one was ready for. Amira clutched the socks tighter in her hands, her heart beating faster. She had never been close to her grandfather, Chief Obinna, but she had heard stories about his fairness, his strength, his ability to see people for who they truly were. For the first time that night, she felt something stir inside her. Not hope yet, but curiosity, a sense that maybe this moment was bigger than her shame. The courtyard grew so quiet that even the rustle of the lawyer opening the folder could be heard. All eyes locked on him, breaths held, as if the paper inside would decide the destiny of everyone standing T. Mr. Adiwale opened the folder carefully, his fingers steady as he pulled out the official documents. The silence in the courtyard was so deep that every turn of the paper sounded louder than it should. He cleared his throat and began to read, his voice firm and unshaken. "This is the final will and testament of Chief Obinna Okonjo." The name alone made some of the older relatives bow their heads in respect. He read through the formal lines, speaking of loyalty, fairness, and legacy. Everyone leaned forward, their eyes fixed on him, waiting to hear which of Kunnel's children would be crowned with more wealth. Some of the guests even smiled, expecting it was just a formality that would favor the family already enjoying luxury. But then his voice grew stronger, each word cutting through the heavy air. "By the wish of Chief Obinna, the rightful heir to his properties, estates, and businesses is his granddaughter, Amira Okonjo." The words dropped like lightning. Gasps erupted from every corner of the courtyard. Hands flew to mouths, eyes widened, and a wave of shock rippled through the crowd. The proud children, still clutching their car keys, froze as though the ground beneath them had disappeared. Kunnel's smile collapsed instantly, his face draining of color. All eyes turned toward Amira. She stood rooted to the ground, the sock still clutched in her hands, her lips parted in disbelief. For a moment she thought she had misheard. She blinked, her heart pounding in her chest, as the lawyer repeated the line clearly, leaving no space for doubt. The courtyard, once filled with laughter and music, had become so still it felt like time itself had stopped. The cars no longer mattered. The whispers no longer mocked. The girl who had been handed socks was now being handed an empire. Amira's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, her eyes filling with tears she could no longer hold back. Not tears of shame, but of something she had never felt in this house before. Worth. In. Connell's face changed in a heartbeat. The proud smile he had been wearing all evening vanished, replaced with a stiff, frozen expression. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His lips trembled slightly as though he had been slapped in front of everyone. The man who had just mocked Amira with socks now looked smaller than he ever had before. His 3 children stood beside their glittering cars, but their joy was gone. Their hands loosened, and the shiny car keys they had been waving proudly slipped through their fingers and fell to the ground with a dull clink. The sound echoed painfully loud in the silence. They stared at Amira with wide eyes, their faces pale with disbelief. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath them, and everything they thought belonged to them had been snatched away in an instant. The guests, who just moments earlier had laughed at Amira, now turned their eyes toward her with awe and shock. The socks she clutched tightly in her hands no longer looked like an insult, they looked like a crown. In the stillness, that small package became a symbol of how life can turn shame into glory within a second. Whispers swept through the courtyard like wildfire. "Did you hear? She's the heir, all of it belongs to her." Some gasped loudly, others shook their heads in disbelief. Connell's relatives looked away from him, ashamed of the cruelty he had shown only moments earlier. His arrogance was shattered, and there was no place for him to hide. Amira's chest rose heavily as she stood in the same corner where she had been ignored. Only now all eyes were on her. She didn't move, she didn't speak, yet her silence roared louder than anything. The tables had turned so quickly that no one could believe what they had just witnessed. And in that heartbeat, the forgotten stepchild became the center of it all. Amira's hand shook as Mr. Adiwale placed the will in her grasp. For a moment she simply stared at the papers, unable to believe they were truly hers to hold. Then the tears came. Not the bitter tears she had swallowed so many times in silence, but warm tears of release. They slid down her cheeks freely, not from weakness, but from the relief of finally being seen. For years she had carried the weight of rejection, of feeling unwanted in her own home. Yet here was proof that someone had thought of her, cared for her, and valued her beyond measure. She clutched the will tightly against her chest, as though holding on to her grandfather's embrace through the words he had left behind. The memory of Chief Obinna was distant. She had not known him deeply, but she had heard of his wisdom and fairness. And now, through this act, he was protecting her even after his death. For the first time she felt that she belonged to someone's heart, that she mattered in a way no cruelty could erase. The crowd watched in silence as Amira's tears glistened in the sunlight. Every drop carried dignity. She was not breaking down. She was standing taller than ever, her pain transforming into strength before their eyes. Those who had mocked her only moments ago lowered their heads, ashamed of their laughter. Even Connell could not meet her gaze. He shifted uncomfortably, his mouth opening and closing without a single word coming out. Amira lifted her chin, her tears still flowing, and her voice trembled softly as she whispered to herself, "I was never forgotten." It was not for the crowd, not even for her stepfather. It was for her own heart, a reminder that her worth had always been greater than the way she had been treated. In that moment, Amira was no longer just the stepdaughter in the shadows. She was the granddaughter chosen to carry forward a legacy. Her tears did not show weakness, they were her crown, proof that dignity survives even the deepest pain. Connell could no longer keep his silence. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, and the eyes of the entire courtyard burned holes into his pride. His throat tightened as he stepped forward, his once bold stride now hesitant and shaky. He reached a trembling hand out toward Amira, his voice stammering, Amira, you know I was only joking. Those socks." His words faltered as his own voice cracked, betraying the shame he was trying to cover. The crowd stared at him coldly, some with narrowed eyes, others with quiet disgust. Everyone remembered clearly the way he had tossed the socks at her, the mocking smile on his face, the laughter he encouraged. Now, hearing him scramble for excuses felt pitiful. Whispers rose again, sharp and cutting. "He calls it a joke now," someone muttered. "Cruelty dressed as a joke," another answered. Amira did not speak. She stood still, the will pressed against her chest, her eyes glistening but strong. Her silence was louder than any reply she could have given. Connell's words bounced off her dignity like stones against iron. The more he tried to explain, the smaller he seemed. His children tugged at his sleeves, whispering, "Papa, stop, please stop." But he pushed forward, desperate. "You must understand, I didn't mean harm," he stammered, his voice breaking apart. You're part of this family too. Those socks, they were just. His excuses dissolved in the air, swallowed by the heavy silence. Even he could hear the emptiness in his own words. Amira finally lifted her head and looked at him, her eyes steady and calm. She said nothing, yet in that gaze was every answer he feared: disappointment, strength, and the unspoken truth that no excuse could erase the cruelty he had shown her. Kunnal's shoulders slumped as his shame became too heavy to carry. The man who had laughed at her now stood trembling, desperate for forgiveness that would never come so easily. The courtyard had already judged him, and worse, so had his Zhao. The courtyard was no longer filled with applause and celebration. It buzzed with sharp whispers that cut deeper than any shout. Relatives leaned close to one another, shaking their heads in disbelief. Neighbors covered their mouths, speaking in hushed but fierce tones that spread quickly through the crowd. "Did you hear what he did?" one woman hissed. "He gave cars to his own children but mocked the true heir with socks." Another added bitterly, "What kind of father does that? What kind of man humiliates a child in front of everyone?" The words circled like fire, burning Kunnal's pride from every side. Everywhere he turned, eyes followed him, not with admiration but with ridicule. The same people who had clapped for him minutes earlier now looked at him with disgust. He could feel their judgment pressing down on him, heavier than the walls of the mansion itself. Kunnal tried to keep his chin up, but the whispers were relentless. "He thought he was clever," a man muttered. "And now look at him, exposed for his arrogance." Laughter slipped through the whispers, not the joyful kind from before, but mocking laughter aimed directly at him. His children shifted uneasily, their car keys useless in their hands. They too could hear the cruel echo of the crowd's words. Even they began to realize how foolish their father looked, how shameful the scene had become. The shiny cars that once seemed like symbols of greatness now felt like props in a cruel play. In the middle of it all, Amira stood silent, her head held high, her tears drying into quiet strength. She didn't need to say anything. The crowd was speaking for her. The same people who had laughed at her humiliation were now defending her with their whispers, lifting her dignity higher with every word. Kunnal's arrogance shattered like glass. His once boastful image lay in pieces at his feet, while Amira's quiet strength rose like a flame in the night. The crowd had chosen who they respected now, and it was no longer him. Amira took a slow breath and straightened her shoulders. The afternoon sun poured over her, making the golden patterns on her Ankara dress shimmer like light on water. She looked like she had been waiting for this moment her whole life, though she never expected it to come in this way. The socks were still folded in her hand, the will pressed against her chest, but now they felt like symbols of victory, not shame. She began to walk. Each step was steady, graceful, and filled with a quiet power that made people move aside without being asked. She passed the gleaming cars one by one, the same cars that had been shown off as trophies only moments ago. Their shine no longer intimidated her. They seemed small now, temporary things compared to the weight of her dignity. The crowd followed her with their eyes, their whispers turning into murmurs of admiration. "Look at her," someone said softly. "She walks like a queen." Another added, "She doesn't even need to speak, her steps are enough." As she drew closer to her stepfather, Kunnal lowered his gaze. He couldn't face her. The same girl he had mocked now carried herself with more honor than he ever could. Amira walked right past him without a word, her silence cutting deeper than any insult. Her steps told the story. She would not bow, she would not shrink. She would not be defined by his cruelty. She moved forward, her head lifted high, her dress catching the light as though even the sun wanted to honor her. The socks in her hand were no longer a reminder of humiliation. They had become proof of how low she had been pushed and how high she had risen. With every step, Amira showed the world that true wealth was not in cars or gifts, but in self-respect. And in that moment, she was richer than anyone else in the courtyard. She was walking in her power, and nothing could take that away from her. That night, Amira's life changed forever. The lawyer, Mr. Adewale, stood by her side as the gates of her late grandfather's main estate opened wide. The mansion loomed tall and grand, its walls glowing softly under the moonlight. For the first time in her life, Amira walked through doors not as a shadow or an unwanted guest, but as the rightful heir. Her heart raced, but her steps were steady, each one carrying the weight of a new beginning. The servants lined up at the entrance, their faces warm with respect. They bowed slightly as she passed, greeting her with words she had never heard directed at her before. "Welcome home, Miss Amira." The sound of it made her chest tighten with emotion. She had spent years being ignored, laughed at, treated like she was less. But here in this estate she was honored. She was seen. The house smelled faintly of wood and polished floors. The chandeliers glittered above her head, casting golden light across the wide hall. She paused for a moment, her eyes traveling over the portraits of her ancestors that hung proudly on the walls. Her grandfather's painting stood tallest, his eyes wise and kind. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Thank you for not forgetting me." Mr. Adiwale gave her a reassuring nod, his voice calm. "This was always meant for you, Amira. Chief Obinna knew your worth, even when others didn't." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of pride. She had walked through fire and humiliation, and now she stood in a place built for her legacy. She was no longer the stepchild standing alone in a corner. She was the granddaughter chosen to carry the name forward. That night, as she settled into her grandfather's estate, Amira realized she had finally taken back her place. The house didn't just belong to her. It felt like her soul had finally found a home. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was the queen of her own story. In the days that followed, the city of Makira could not stop talking about what had happened in the Okonjo courtyard. From the busy markets to the quiet tea shops, from grand offices to crowded buses, the story spread like wildfire. People shook their heads in disbelief as they repeated the same line again and again. He gave his children cars but gave his stepdaughter only socks, and she inherited everything. Neighbors whispered it with a mix of shock and admiration. Mothers told their daughters, fathers told their sons, and elders repeated it as a lesson about patience and dignity. "Do not mock the one you think is small," they warned. "For God has a way of lifting the humble above the proud." Amira's name became a symbol of quiet strength. People spoke of the way she stood tall when others laughed, of how she held her tears until the truth revealed itself. Her story became a reminder that cruelty cannot erase destiny, and that dignity is more powerful than riches. Kunal, once respected, became the subject of ridicule. His arrogance was the caution in every retelling. But Amira, the girl who once stood invisible in a corner, became a beacon of hope. Everywhere, people repeated her story, not just as gossip, but as a tale of divine justice. And in every version the ending was the same. The stepchild who was mocked with socks walked away with a crown.